Hello, welcome to the Learn English Lab. Okay, let's unpack this. Today's podcast, Advanced English Listening Practice Podcast, topic name is 30 plus C1 level vocabulary on research. Our mission today is really laser focused. We want to help you move from just, understanding a topic to actually achieving academic fluency.
Exactly. We're diving into a pretty high level set of words here. Over 30 C1 level vocabulary terms. These are absolutely foundational if you're engaging with serious academic and scientific research.
That's right. This isn't just about memorizing definitions off a list.
No, not at all. It's about getting the toolkit you need to actually operate effectively within scholarly discussions. Think of these terms as the linguistic bridges, yeah? They connect the raw data, the complex methods, and ultimately the big theoretical insights.
Mm-hmm. So mastering this vocabulary gives you that precision needed to, say, critique a research paper properly or structure an advanced report or maybe even lead a professional discussion on some new findings.
That's the goal. When you have these words, you can articulate complex ideas much more clearly.
Okay, so we've organized this deep dive around the whole life cycle of research, more or less. We'll start with the foundational language, the difference between theory and evidence, that kind of thing.
Then we'll get into how studies are actually designed, focusing on methodology and the different types of data you might encounter.
And our third part takes us kind of inside the lab, looking at the execution, the tools, the research subjects themselves.
And finally, we wrap it all up with the academic cycle. Validation, how findings are reported formally, and of course, critique.
Sounds like a comprehensive plan. Let's jump into section 1, the foundational language of inquiry.
Let's do it.
Okay, so every serious investigation has to start somewhere. And often, one of the very first words you might see in a report, or maybe hear at a conference, is preliminary. What does that actually signal to someone reading or listening?
Preliminary. It's such a critical term because it manages expectations right from the start. It basically means initial or preparatory, introductory.
Okay, initial.
Yeah, so when a researcher talks about preliminary results, they're being upfront. They're saying, look, these are early trends, maybe initial indications, but they haven't gone through the full, rigorous final analysis yet.
So it's kind of like a heads up, a warning almost, but also a sign of progress. Like, here's where we are so far.
Precisely. It indicates progress, but flags that it's not the final word. For instance, a research team might do a preliminary survey, quick, maybe low cost, just to test the waters, gauge public opinion, or even check if their questions work before they launch the big, expensive main study.
Or maybe in a grant proposal. They might include a preliminary literature review just to show, hey, there's a gap here. We need to do this full research.
Spot on. And you see this outside academia too, right? Corporations often release preliminary earnings reports. Investors pay attention, but they know the final audited numbers might look a bit different.
So the core meaning is initial, but the context tells you how much weight to give it at that stage.
Exactly. It's a status update. We're on the way, but not quite there yet.
Okay, good. Now, once you get past that initial stage, the research itself often falls into one of two really fundamental categories. This creates the core dichotomy, empirical versus theoretical. Let's tackle the one that gives us the hard data first. Empirical.
Right, empirical. This term defines really the bedrock of validation, particularly in the sciences. It means your findings, your conclusions, they're based directly on observations or experiments.
So data from the real world.
Yes, exactly. Evidence-based data collected out there, not just abstract ideas or assumptions worked out purely through logic.
So if a study is labeled empirical, it means the researchers, they got their hands dirty, didn't they? They were out in the field or in the lab running stats on things they actually observed or measured.
That's a great way to put it. They engaged with the world directly. And this is hugely important in applied research, right? Think about government policy. If an agency is drafting new environmental rules, you expect them to base those decisions on solid empirical findings from large-scale studies, things you can measure.
You can't just base policy on a hunch.
Definitely not. Or think about medicine. A claim that a new drug works is, it's pretty meaningless until you have empirical data from clinical trials showing a measurable effect on patients. The rigor of science really hinges on this commitment to empirical testing. Observational, evidence-based. Those are good synonyms.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting. The contrast. We pit that hands-on approach against the theoretical. What happens when research is purely conceptual?
Theoretical. This kind of inquiry is based on logical reasoning, on conceptual models, rather than immediate practical real-world experience. Think about something like high-energy physics.
Right.
Researchers might spend years developing complex theoretical models to predict how, say, undiscovered particles might behave. This is long before they even build the multi-billion-dollar machine to try and find them.
So a theoretical framework is like the underlying set of ideas or concepts that guides the whole study. You see this in sociology too, right? Building models of social behavior.
Absolutely. Sociologists, economists, they often build theoretical frameworks. The big challenge then is taking a purely theoretical proposition and moving it into the realm of accepted scientific knowledge.
And how does that happen?
Well, that usually requires empirical validation. A paper can be brilliant, purely theoretical, built on flawless logic, but it often doesn't gain widespread acceptance until those ideas can finally be tested rigorously. Empirical tests in the lab or out in the field.
So they really need each other. Theory asks the questions.
And empirical methods try to provide the answers. You often need both for major advancements. Hypothetical, abstract, good ways to think about theoretical.
Got it. Now, whether the research starts from empirical observation or theoretical reasoning, the work itself, the discussion around it, happens within this specific environment we call scholarly discourse.
Yeah, scholarly. Using that word immediately signals rigor. It tells you this is about serious academic study. It sets the work apart as being part of a high-level intellectual investigation. Honestly, this whole vocabulary list we're discussing is part of that specialized scholarly discourse.
And we usually associate scholarly with specific places or formats, right? Like scholarly journals.
Definitely. Those are publications that, have a gatekeeping function. They only accept articles after they've gone through a tough vetting process, usually peer review, which we'll talk about later. That's the institutional mechanism trying to ensure intellectual seriousness.
So it's about standards.
High standards, yes. And the discourse isn't just written. Attending scholarly conferences is vital. It's not just about presenting your own work, but about engaging in that ongoing conversation, defending your ideas, and connecting with other people who are deeply involved in that specific area of study, that body of literature.
So scholarly basically signifies that the research meets a certain recognized level of quality and seriousness.
That's a good summary. It's operating within the accepted norms of academic rigor.
Okay, moving into section 2. Defining the research approach. We've got the foundations. Now, how do we actually structure the investigation? This brings us to a really critical term, methodology.
Right, methodology. And this one often gets confused with just methods.
Oh, okay. What's the difference?
Well, methods are the specific tools you use, maybe surveys, interviews, statistical tests, that kind of thing. Methodology, though, is bigger. It's the whole system, the series of procedures, the overall approach, and crucially, the philosophical rationale behind why you chose those procedures. It's the logic structuring the entire research design.
So it's the why behind the what.
Yeah.
If I were critiquing a paper, I wouldn't just look at what they did, but why they did it that way, and if that was the best way to answer their question.
Exactly. That methodology section in a paper needs to be incredibly detailed. It should explain not just how data was collected, but also justify the choices made. Why use a longitudinal study instead of a cross-sectional one, for example?
That makes sense. So the ability to really critique the methodology is probably a core skill for advanced work then.
Oh, absolutely essential. If the fundamental design, the methodology, is flawed, if the reasoning behind the approach doesn't hold up, then the results, no matter how interesting they seem, are fundamentally weakened.
So the whole house is built on sand if the methodology is shaky.
Pretty much. And you'll often see experienced researchers talk about using a mixed methodology, combining different approaches, different techniques, to get a more robust, well-rounded picture.
Okay, that leads us neatly into the data itself. How we classify it is fundamental. Qualitative versus quantitative. This distinction really shapes the whole feel of the findings, doesn't it?
It really does. Let's start with quantitative. Think numbers, measurement, statistics. Quantitative data relates to amounts, figures, anything that can be objectively counted and analyzed statistically. It usually aims for breadth, for generalizability across a larger group.
So a quantitative study might involve surveying, say, 10,000 people to get statistical evidence supporting broad claims about a population.
Correct. And researchers use computational tools, statistical models, to analyze all this numerical data. They're looking for correlations, statistical significance. You see it heavily used in fields like market research or performance evaluation, where you track quantitative metrics like sales figures or website clicks to see if something's working effectively.
Numerical, Statistical, those capture it well.
They do. The power of quantitative data is its ability to be statistically analyzed and potentially generalized. Now, conversely, qualitative research deals with the quality, the nature, the character of something rather than the amount.
So less about numbers, more about depth,
Yeah.
description.
Exactly. It's descriptive, it's rich in context, and often, yes, it involves interpretation, making it seem more subjective sometimes.
So instead of that massive survey, qualitative research might involve maybe in-depth qualitative interviews with just, say, 20 people, trying to really understand their personal experiences, uncover themes.
That's a classic example. Researchers then use qualitative analysis to interpret the narratives, the themes that emerge from those interviews or observations. They're looking for patterns in meaning, not necessarily patterns in numbers.
And this is where that mixed methods approach you mentioned comes in handy again.
Absolutely. Combining the approaches can be incredibly powerful. Using those rich qualitative insights can provide crucial context, depth, and sort of the human story behind the hard quantitative metrics. It often makes the final conclusions much more convincing and nuanced.
Right, getting the best of both worlds. Now, when designing any methodology, researchers have to be really careful about controlling things, ensuring fairness, defining the scope. This involves setting clear parameters.
Yes, parameter. Essentially, a parameter is a limit, a boundary, or a criterion that strictly controls how something should be done or measured. It sets the rules of the game, so to speak.
Could you give an example?
Sure. If you're running a complex computer simulation, maybe a climate model, you have to set strict parameters for all the variables, things like temperature ranges, pressure limits, the time duration. This ensures the model stays within realistic, measurable bounds.
So it's like a guideline, a boundary that you can't cross. And I guess in ethical studies, setting parameters for acceptable participant conduct is just as vital as setting them for a machine simulation.
Absolutely critical. Defining those boundaries is key. And within those parameters, especially when dealing with people or even samples, researchers need to avoid bias creeping in. That's where randomization becomes so important.
Right, randomization. That sounds like it's about shuffling things up.
In a way, yes. Randomization is the deliberate process of assigning subjects, or maybe treatments, purely by chance. The whole point is to yield unbiased results. It's designed to neutralize any underlying factors that could skew the findings unfairly.
So it stops researchers from, maybe subconsciously, putting certain types of people into the treatment group versus the control group.
Precisely. It's fundamental for the validity of the study, especially in high-stakes areas like medicine. Think about a rigorous clinical trial, maybe a double-blind one. Randomization ensures fair group assignments. It helps guarantee that the group getting the real treatment and the group getting the placebo are, statistically speaking, pretty much equivalent at the start.
Which means?
Which means any difference you see in the outcomes at the end is much more likely to be genuinely due to the treatment itself, not some pre-existing difference between the groups. It massively strengthens the study's internal validity. Chance assignment, random allocation, good synonyms there.
Okay, section 3. Inside the lab, we've got the foundation, methodology, now we're into the actual execution. The tools, the tests, the subjects. And the core of this phase is often the experimental approach.
Right. When we say a study is experimental, we mean it's specifically designed around scientific experiments. The goal is usually to rigorously test a hypothesis, explore cause and effect, or measure how effective an intervention is. The experimental design itself has to be meticulously planned out to control for, or at least account for, every possible influencing variable.
And you can't really run an experiment without tools. This brings us to the apparatus.
Yes, the apparatus. This is the collective term for the equipment, the machinery, maybe a whole setup of tools designed for a very specific, often technical purpose.
So it could be anything from like a really complex mass spectrometer in chemistry.
Exactly. Or specialized robotic arms in engineering, or even just a well-calibrated set of psychological testing instruments. The point is, the reliability of the research findings is intrinsically tied to the reliability and accuracy of the apparatus. Equipment, device, those work too.
Which makes me think about the problems that can arise. You sometimes see it mentioned in papers, right? When things go wrong with the equipment.
Oh, definitely. Transparency is key. A good research report has to acknowledge if technical issues occurred. You might read a sentence like, "Unfortunately, the apparatus malfunctioned during phase 2 of data collection, requiring whatever adjustments they made." It highlights how dependent science can be on its tools.
That kind of honesty is crucial for rigor, yeah. Now, one of the most controlled and arguably most important applications of the experimental process, especially involving humans, is the clinical trial.
Ah, yes, clinical trials. These go beyond just a basic lab experiment. A clinical trial is a very specific type of controlled experiment designed to measure both the effectiveness and the safety of a medical treatment, like a drug, a vaccine, maybe a surgical procedure, usually tested on human volunteers.
Control and ethics seem paramount here.
Absolutely. The most critical prize might be, say, testing a vaccine's efficacy over months or years. And because human subjects are involved, the ethical considerations are huge, often legally mandated. Everything from how people are recruited to how results are reported is governed by strict ethical protocols.
You use the word subjects there. What's the formal definition in this research context?
A subject is simply the individual entity could be a person, an animal, sometimes even an inanimate object on which the study is formally performed or observed.
And using that term immediately flags the need for protection, right?
It should, yes. Strict ethical guidelines protect research subjects. Things like mandatory informed consent, making sure people know exactly what they're signing up for, ensuring privacy, and giving them the absolute right to withdraw from the study at any time, no questions asked.
Okay. But there's also that other term, less formal, maybe more evocative, that you hear sometimes, especially in the media, guinea pig.
Yes, the guinea pig. It refers to someone on whom experiments are tested, but it often carries this extra connotation of risk, or maybe the untested nature of the trial. Academics will usually use subject or participant.
But the public might talk about volunteers in, say, very early stage, potentially risky drug trials as guinea pigs.
Right. Or it's used metaphorically as a warning, isn't it? You might hear someone say, "Don't be a guinea pig for that unproven diet fad or some new untested technology." Test subject, experimental volunteers, similar ideas, but guinea pig often implies higher stakes or less certainty.
Okay. Now, to make sure the results from something like a clinical trial are actually valid, to be confident the change observed is really because of the drug and not something else, researchers rely heavily on using a control group.
The control group is absolutely essential. It serves as the standard for comparison. So in a typical drug study, the control group received a placebo, an inactive substance made to look exactly like the real drug, while the experimental group got the actual treatment being tested.
Why is that so crucial? Could they just compare the group getting the drug to, like, historical data on how people normally recover?
They could, but it's much weaker scientifically. Doing that introduces way too many other potential explanations, confounding variables. By maintaining strict controls, having that parallel group experiencing everything the same except the active treatment researchers can isolate the effect of the one thing they're testing.
So it helps rule out other factors.
Exactly. Any significant difference in outcomes between the two groups at the end can then be attributed much more reliably to the treatment itself. It helps negate things like the placebo effect, or maybe changes in the environment over time, or just natural recovery rates. It's vital for the integrity and the statistical power of the results. Baseline, reference group, those are similar concepts.
Got it. Now, sometimes researchers need information about things they can't directly observe, like how much pain someone feels, their mood, their opinions, subjective experiences. In those cases, they often have to ask participants to self-report.
Yes, to self-report simply means the subjects themselves provide information about their own personal experiences, their behaviors, or their internal states, like feelings or symptoms.
So, questionnaires, surveys, diaries.
Those are common methods, yes. It's essential in health surveys, for instance, where participants self-report their symptoms or maybe their adherence to taking medication.
But wait, if the data is subjective by nature, how valuable is it in rigorous, maybe empirical research?
That's a fair question. It is valuable, often invaluable, because sometimes it's the only way to get that information. Only the individual truly knows their internal state. However, researchers absolutely must acknowledge the limitations.
Like people maybe not remembering accurately or wanting to look good.
Precisely. Potential biases are a real concern with self-report data. There's social desirability bias, the tendency to answer in ways that seem socially acceptable. And yes, memory can be faulty. Good methodology will often try to mitigate this, maybe by using specific questioning techniques, ensuring anonymity, or sometimes trying to cross-validate the self-report data with more objective measures where possible.
Okay. Moving from the subjective to the very objective hard sciences, let's talk about a specific tool and methodology used in fields like archaeology, carbon dating.
Carbon dating. A fascinating and highly sophisticated tool. It's used specifically for measuring the age of organic materials, things that were once living.
How does it work, basically?
It works by measuring the amount of a radioactive isotope of carbon, carbon-14, that's still remaining in the sample. Since C14 decays at a known constant rate after an organism dies, you can calculate how long ago it died. It's crucial in archaeology and paleontology. Archaeologists use carbon dating to determine the age of ancient bones, wood, textiles, that sort of thing.
Very cool. But you mentioned limitations earlier. Even advanced tools like this have them, right? What are the main ones for carbon dating?
Yes, definitely limitations. The big ones are time range and contamination. After about 50,000 years or so, the amount of C14 left is usually too tiny to measure accurately. And if the sample gets contaminated with more recent organic material, that can really skew the results, making it seem younger than it is.
So any reported carbon dating age needs to be interpreted with those potential limitations in mind.
Always. High-level analysis always involves careful consideration of potential errors and stating the known limitations alongside the estimated age.
Okay, so once all this data, whether it's qualitative interview transcripts or quantitative measurements from an apparatus is collected, the next big step is analysis. Figuring out what it all means, looking for connections. This is where we see if variables correlate.
Right. To correlate means that two or more variables seem to be closely connected. They might move together or have mutual effects or show similar trends. This is the point where researchers shift from just listing data points to actively looking for statistically meaningful relationships within that data.
And you hear this term used everywhere, right? Studies might show that, say, regular exercise tends to correlate with improved cognitive function in older adults.
That's a perfect example. Or economic research might demonstrate how higher national growth rates correlate with higher average levels of education in the population. To relate similar ideas.
But there's a really important distinction here, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely crucial, especially at the C1 level. Correlation is not the same as causation. This is a mantra in research. While a study might show powerfully that two variables correlate, it does not automatically prove that one causes the other.
Can you give that classic example?
Sure. The famous one is that ice cream sales strongly correlate with drowning rates. They both go up in the summer, but eating ice cream doesn't cause drowning.
Right, the hidden factor is the hot weather, which causes both.
Exactly. The weather is the confounding variable. So as an advanced learner engaging with research, you must always be critical and distinguish between correlation, just a relationship, and causation, a proven direct influence. A really strong methodology will actually try to design the study to test for causation, even if sometimes the data only ends up revealing a correlation.
Okay, great distinction. Section 4. The academic cycle. We've analyzed the data, found correlations. Now we're into validation, reporting, and critique. Starting with validation, we need to know if an effect we think we see is actually detectable.
Yes, detectable. This simply means that the change or the effect or maybe the presence of a substance is noticeable or discoverable. Usually it means it's above some kind of baseline level or background noise.
So it's about whether our instruments or methods are sensitive enough.
Pretty much. It's crucial in fields like environmental science or medicine. Tiny changes in, say, a patient's blood chemistry might be barely detectable without really sophisticated advanced apparatus. Or trace amounts of a pollutant in water might only become detectable once they cross a certain critical concentration threshold.
So if something is below the detectable limit, it doesn't necessarily mean it's completely absent, just that we can't reliably measure it with current tools.
Precisely. It emphasizes that measurement is always relative to the technology and methods being used. Discernible, noticeable, good synonyms.
Okay. So once you think you've detected something interesting, the next big step, the heavy lifting, is you have to verify it.
Verify. This means to examine something carefully to confirm its truth or accuracy. This is really the ultimate goal of the whole experimental and scientific process.
It's not enough to see something once.
Definitely not in science. It's considered a pillar of scientific rigor. You must be able to verify the hypothesis through repeated tests, ideally conducted by independent researchers who get the same results using your methods.
Replication.
Exactly. Only after this rigorous process of verification and replication does an interesting initial observation start to transition into a reliable scientific finding. That's also why academic papers have to be so detailed about their methodology so others can try to replicate and thus verify or potentially challenge the results. To confirm, to authenticate those fit well.
And sometimes the whole point of a study isn't to confirm something, but the opposite. It's designed to disprove an existing idea.
Yes, to disprove. This means showing conclusively, usually through strong evidence, that something previously believed or proposed is actually false or incorrect.
How does that happen?
Well, scientific progress often happens this way. New, compelling empirical evidence emerges that convincingly disproves outdated theories. Think about how the geocentric model of the universe, the idea that everything revolves around the Earth, was eventually disproved by centuries of astronomical observations and calculations. It constitutes a scientific rebuttal. To refute, to invalidate strong synonyms there.
This whole rigorous process detection, verification, sometimes disproof seems crucial because the academic world is constantly needing to push back against claims that aren't backed by evidence. Things often labeled as pseudoscience.
Pseudoscience, a really important term to understand. It refers to practices, theories, or beliefs that are presented as being scientific, but they actually lack any real foundational scientific or empirical basis. They haven't been subjected to proper testing and verification.
So it's like fake science, dressed up to look legitimate.
Essentially, yes. Quackery bogus theory. It often uses scientific-sounding jargon, but doesn't adhere to scientific methods or standards of evidence.
Can you think of common examples? Things like astrology, maybe, or certain extreme health claims without verifiable backing.
Those are classic examples. They might present anecdotes or maybe self-report testimonials, but they lack the controlled methodology, the verifiable evidence, and the peer review process that are required for genuine scientific acceptance.
So being scientifically literate helps you spot this.
Absolutely. Advanced scientific literacy empowers you to critically evaluate claims, to debunk pseudoscience using evidence-based facts and logical reasoning. And honestly, with the way information spreads online today, the ability to distinguish between verifiable science and persuasive-sounding pseudoscience is more critical than ever.
Okay, now thinking about the formal process, before a researcher even starts designing their methodology or running preliminary tests, there's a crucial groundwork step: immersing themselves in the existing literature.
Yes, the literature. In an academic context, this refers to the entire body of existing scholarly writings, published articles, books, conference proceedings on a specific subject. Reviewing the literature thoroughly is step one.
Why is it so essential?
Well, you need to know what's already known. It ensures your proposed research is original, that it addresses a real gap or builds upon established knowledge in a meaningful way. It also helps you refine your research question and avoid just reinventing the wheel. You can't really formulate a strong thesis without understanding the current state of the literature.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Research done, analysis complete. Now you need to report the findings formally. This can take different forms. For a really long, comprehensive, maybe foundational piece of writing, you might produce a treatise.
Right, a treatise. This isn't just a standard article. It's usually a long, formal, very detailed piece of writing exploring a single subject in great depth. Think of a major philosophical work or a comprehensive scientific monograph that aims to be definitive, like a treatise on quantum mechanics or something similarly substantial.
So it signals a major authoritative contribution. Monograph, dissertation, maybe similar in scope?
Often, yes. Though a dissertation is usually tied to a degree, a treatise can stand alone as a major scholarly work. But regardless of length, whether it's a short article or a massive treatise, every formal piece of academic writing is built around its central thesis.
The thesis. This is a core argument, right?
Right, exactly. The thesis is the main statement, the central proposition, or the primary claim that the entire piece of writing is trying to argue for and support with evidence. It's the anchor for the whole document.
And in many academic settings, like grad school, you literally have to defend your thesis.
Yeah, often in an oral examination in front of a committee of experts, you have to argue for the merit, the originality, and the validity of your central argument, your thesis. Hypothesis, proposition, similar concepts, but thesis usually refers to the main argument of a completed work.
Okay. Now, with potentially long and complex papers or treatises, readers need a quick way to figure out what it's about and if it's relevant to them. That's the job of the abstract, right?
Yeah, precisely. The abstract is that short summary right at the beginning. It's a synopsis, a precis. It briefly presents the absolute key points of the paper. Usually the research question, the methodology used, the main results, and the core conclusion.
So it's like a trailer for the paper.
That's a good analogy. Its function is purely practical. Busy researchers or students read the abstract first to quickly gauge the paper's relevance. Is this worth my time to read in full? The abstract answers that.
And as researchers write these formal reports, academic integrity, demands careful and correct citation.
Oh, non-negotiable. A citation is the formal reference to a source acknowledging where a specific idea, quote, piece of data or concept came from.
Why is it so strict?
It's about intellectual honesty and giving credit where it's due. You absolutely must include a citation for every borrowed idea, phrase, or piece of data to credit the original author and, crucially, to avoid plagiarism, which is a serious academic offense. Plus, good citations allow readers to trace your sources and verify your claims themselves. And they have to follow specific formatting rules, those style parameters like APA or MLA.
Right. Now, we touched on honesty earlier. Even the best study, the most rigorously conducted research, will have limitations. And acknowledging them is key.
Yes, limitations. These are the inherent constraints, restrictions, or weaknesses in a study's design, its execution, or maybe its scope that could potentially affect how you interpret the findings or how widely you can generalize them.
And good researchers point these out themselves.
Absolutely. It's considered standard good practice. In fact, it's often required for researchers to transparently acknowledge study limitations in the discussion section of their paper. It shows they understand the boundaries of their own work.
Can you give a quick example of a common limitation?
Sure. A very common one is sample size or composition. Maybe due to funding or time limitations, the study used a small sample, or perhaps only participants from one specific region or demographic group. That means the findings might not apply or generalize to a broader population. That's a key limitation to state. Or maybe the apparatus used had a certain level of precision, imposing a limitation on how subtle the detectable effects could be.
So acknowledging limitations isn't a sign of failure, but rather a sign of intellectual honesty and rigor.
Exactly. It helps readers understand the context and the true confidence level of the findings.
Okay, manuscript written, limitations acknowledged. Now comes arguably the ultimate validation step in the formal academic cycle. Peer review.
Peer review. This is the formalized process where academic work, research papers, grant proposals is assessed by other experts, by peers working in the very same subject area. It's widely considered the gold standard for quality control in academia.
What's its main purpose?
It aims to ensure the work meets accepted standards of rigor, originality, significance, and ethical conduct before it gets published or funded. Expert evaluation, the referee process those, capture the idea.
How does it work to try and ensure it's fair and impartial?
Well, typically when you submit a paper to a scholarly journal, the editor sends it out to usually 2 or 3 independent reviewers who are experts on that specific topic. Often this is done using blind peer review, meaning either the reviewers don't know who the author is, single blind, or neither the reviewers nor the author knows each other's identities, double blind. This anonymity is intended to help ensure that the critique focuses solely on the quality of the research, the methodology, the evidence, the argument, rather than being influenced by the author's reputation or institutional affiliation.
Okay. And finally, after all this intense work from preliminary ideas through peer review, what's the point if the knowledge just sits there? It needs to get out. We need dissemination.
Right. Dissemination is simply the action of spreading information, knowledge, or news widely and effectively. All the previous steps lead up to this.
So how does research get disseminated?
Traditionally, scholarly conferences and publications in peer-reviewed journals have been the main channels for the dissemination of findings. This allows researchers to share their results, get feedback, and contribute to the collective knowledge base.
And that's changing now with digital tech.
Dramatically. Digital platforms, online journals, preprint servers, research repositories, even social media to some extent now accelerate knowledge dissemination incredibly. New findings can be shared globally almost instantly, which speeds up the entire scientific cycle of discussion, replication, and building on new knowledge. Distribution, propagation, similar meanings.
Wow. Okay. We have journeyed through a really intensive lexicon here. We followed the research path right from the preliminary glimmer of an idea through empirical testing and grappling with methodology, all the way to the global dissemination of a finished treatise or paper.
It's quite a vocabulary set.
It really is.
Yeah.
And mastering these terms, being able to scrutinize the methodology, identify truly empirical data, recognize the limitations of a study that doesn't just, add words to your list. It genuinely empowers your ability to engage with complex topics.
Mm-hmm.
You can participate on a truly advanced professional level.
I completely agree. And perhaps the most critical takeaway for anyone navigating the sheer volume of information out there today is exactly that capacity you just mentioned. The ability to distinguish between a verifiable finding backed by evidence and rigor and something that maybe sounds convincing but actually smacks of pseudoscience.
And understanding that even good science has limitations.
Understanding those inherent limitations is just as important. It transforms you from being just a passive reader or listener into an active, critical, informed consumer and user of knowledge.
That is definitely a powerful final thought for you, the listener, to carry forward. Remember that great research is often driven by, well, endless curiosity, but it always has to be tempered by that rigorous approach we've discussed.
Well said. And if you found this deep dive helpful for your learning journey, if you feel it was well researched for you, we'd certainly encourage you to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel.
Yes, please do. It helps others find this advanced listening practice, and you can join the ongoing conversation. Until next time.